Chris here again. As I promised, I was going to come back and do a final video on my trip to the Overland Track in Tasmania, just to review the trip, some of the things that I'd learned there, and hopefully provide some advice to some of you guys who are looking to do this trip in the future. So I thought I'd probably just go through 10 of the things that I thought were pretty significant about the trip, good bits of advice, and probably at the end I'll also just talk to you about 3 pieces of equipment which I think made a really big difference to my enjoyment of the trip, and just really sort of to confirm and reiterate just how important it is to have the right equipment with you when you're doing this sort of a hike. So look, we booked this trip in July last year for mid-February 2019. The idea behind that was it was the middle of summer. We thought, February is probably the best chance we have of not getting really bad weather. So we were kind of hopeful that was going to be the case. Now, as the date got closer, we looked at the forecast and we saw that despite the weather having been really good the previous few weeks, it was kind of, low teens and high teens or low to mid 20s most of those days. As we started to look at our forecast for the week we were doing it, there was a huge cold front coming through, and as each day sort of appeared on the forecast, it was getting colder and colder and very wet right throughout. Now, when we got down there, it turned out the forecast was extremely accurate. We had a very wet week and very cold. And look, I had prepared for this. I made sure I was kind of covered for all seasons, even if it was going to snow, which it actually did. So yeah, here we are in the middle of summer, and it's it's freezing cold and it's snowing. So look, I took that on board and really prepared well for that. But look, I'll start going through the 10 things, because the number one thing I've got on my list is take the right gear. You've got to be prepared for all seasons down in Tassie. All of the things you hear about, the weather being changeable down there, it's all true. We've seen that firsthand. So look, the friend that I was hiking with, unfortunately, she didn't have a very good wet weather jacket, and as a result, that actually killed the trip for her effectively. On the first day when we started, it was raining pretty much most of the day, heavy showers with occasional breaks of sunshine, but very cold up on the passes. And as a result, her jacket just got soaked through. The wind was blowing pretty strongly up there, and she just got frozen essentially. It made the first day pretty challenging for us, because I was obviously concerned about trying to get her down and into the warmth of the first hut. So yeah, she had to make a really hard call that night, and knowing what the weather was going to be like, and just that her jacket wasn't going to hold up, she just had to make a decision to turn back. So as a result, I walked her most of the way back out the following day in similarly bad conditions, and so that sort of shortcut her entire trip, unfortunately. I'd say that's number one. Make sure you've got the right gear, because it's going to make a huge difference to even whether you can complete the trip or not, as it was for my friend. So the second thing I would say is plan your pack weight really carefully. This is a long trip. We did it I did it over 7 days, 6 nights. So you're taking a week's worth of food with you. You want to try and plan that really carefully, just in terms of weight. We probably weren't really that scientific about it when we were planning, but and we probably took more food than we needed, but as I'd said previously, I didn't want to go hungry, so wanted to make sure that was there's going to be plenty to cover it. But you do need to plan carefully what you're going to take, just so you're not taking a whole bunch of really heavy stuff, because when you first start the trip, your weight for all of your food really adds up, for that week's worth of food essentially that you're carrying. So you really want to try and plan that pretty carefully. And hopefully that previous video I did on food that we took gave you some good ideas for that. Number 3, I'd say be prepared to change your plans. You know, our plans had kind of been laid out. We did have that rest day built in there, so we had planned for that already. That gave us a bit of flexibility, fortunately for the thing that happened to my friend on the first day, in that, you know, I kind of lost the day essentially because I had to hike her back out and stayed back in the same hut on the second night as well. So, you know, be prepared to change your plans. If the weather is going to get really, really bad and you're not prepared for it, you need to just be flexible and plan for that. It was just, the weather we had, just essentially it rained every day except for the last day. And as I said, on one of those days it actually snowed as well. As I said before, I had planned for that, so I was comfortable on the whole trip with the gear that I had. So, but yeah, you need to be flexible, just depending on what happens, and that could be even if, you know, someone gets injured or whatever it might be. You need to have flexibility built into your plans for this trip. So number 4, I would just say heed the advice of others regarding any weather, any time of year. Kind of touched on this already, as I said. It could have been a very different trip if we had have gone even just the week before. We would have had sunshine most of the week, dry weather, and in fact Tasmania had a lot of bushfires over the last few weeks, and this was the first really wet period that they'd had for quite a while. So it just, you know, despite it being the middle of summer, it really was like just a wintry week up there, and that didn't change my enjoyment of the trip. It just meant it was a different experience to probably what I was anticipating when we first booked it. So you need to just, yeah, listen to the advice that Tassie's weather can do anything, any time of the year. Number 5, I'd say be prepared to watch your steps a lot. The track is very uneven in lots of places. There are areas that have boardwalk down, and that's partly because the Parks and Wildlife Service want to protect the environment that you're walking over by not walking in it. But there's very, you know, significant areas as well where you're walking over tree roots. That's probably one of the things you'll see a lot of. There's just tree roots everywhere, especially when you're walking through rainforest. You're really just navigating your way around big tree roots, and when it's wet, they can be very slippery, and you really need to watch your footing. Rocks are the other thing. There's sections of the track where you've just got all these uneven rocks that you're walking over, and you just need to be watching your footing a lot. It means that you need to probably, if you can, try and stop a bit more often just to take in what's around you, because a lot of the time you are looking at your feet. So you need to sort of be prepared to just be watching where you step a lot. And look, the amount of rain that there'd been meant that the trails in a lot of areas it was essentially like creeks with running water coming down them. So you're basically walking through a stream, and you're navigating, through a lot of water and mud. You just need to be prepared for that as well. Number 6, I've said this is just about the huts. My original intention was to pitch the tent every night. I thought that would have been really nice to do on a summer hike, just because it was so wet. Most people had the same idea as me. They didn't want to be pitching a tent every night in the rain and packing up a wet tent every day. So most people opted to sleep in the huts for this trip. What that meant was they could be pretty cozy. The hut sizes do vary quite a bit. So the huts at the first night's campsite, Waterfall Valley, and also then at Windermere, those two are actually fairly small huts. You then get to Pelion Hut, which is actually huge. and that's where I actually spent a couple of nights there because I did manage to get that rest day. So that was a nice one to spend a bit more time at. You've then got Kiora Hut, which is also quite small. That's probably one of the smallest huts actually on the track. And then after that one you've got the Bert Nichols Hut at Windy Ridge. That's a really nice size hut. It's actually I think it's probably the newest one, and it's just huge. It's really well set out. Some people don't like it because it's too spacious, but I just thought it was great how it had a kitchen separated off from all the sleeping quarters. So that was really quite comfortable to sleep in. Narcissus Hut, similarly, that's quite small. I didn't stay there because that was the final day where I was taking the ferry. But I did hear that there were plans to do some renovations on that, which may mean it's being increased in size as well. As I said, I didn't really want to, I didn't intend to stay in the huts for the whole week. It was just the way that the weather worked out that it was just a better option to be able to have a dry place to sleep, not have to worry about packing up a wet tent and carrying that with you as well as all the other gear you're sort of hauling around. So yeah, look, I thought it would be good to give some advice about the huts, but they're great, very comfortable, easy enough to get seating to do all your cooking and that sort of stuff, and it's kind of a nice way to meet a bunch of other people as well, which is the experience that I had just by having that sort of social area in the huts. Number 7, I've said open your eyes to the things that are right in front of you, and not necessarily just the bigger things that are all around you. So you're out there, you want to look at the big landscapes, the mountain ranges, the valleys, all that sort of stuff. Because of the weather that I had on a few of the days, where particularly on the second day, where it was kind of, the cloud was just all around and you couldn't really see very far at all. It meant that you were sort of more focused on looking at things that were closer to you, and you just find by doing that you're discovering some really amazing things that you might miss otherwise if you're just trying to look sort of into the distance all the time. And I'm just thinking of one example, which was I think it's called a cushion plant, which I learned that these things are so fragile that if a boot mark goes into one of these by someone standing on it, it effectively kills that part of the plant, and that regeneration of that section can take about up to 30 years. So you can see why the environment's just so fragile. This particular one was just right next to the boardwalk in one of the plateau sections, and it's just, you see that sort of stuff and it's just things you don't see anywhere else. It's really quite unique. So I'd just say keep an eye open for that sort of stuff, because it could be that you miss a lot of that if you're always sort of looking further ahead. Number 8 kind of probably relates a little bit to what I've just spoken about, which is just respect the environment that you're in. That there's that little motto in there about leave no trace. It was really good on the track in my experience with other hikers that I saw. Everyone was very respectful of the environment they were in. The Overland Track and the Cradle Mountain Lake St Clair National Park is apparently one of the best preserved areas in the world, and you can see all the work that goes into making sure that's the case. So just go in there with the respect that it is a fragile ecosystem, and you're trying to minimise your impact on the environment there. That obviously just means things like making sure you're not leaving litter, keeping to the tracks, not sort of beating out new paths, which is obviously going to affect areas of the vegetation that should otherwise just be left alone. So I'd just say that's just something to keep in mind, because it means that others can go after you and continue to enjoy an amazing experience in a really well protected area. So number 9, I said, if you're going to take the ferry and you're not going to be hiking around the lake on the last day, around Lake St Clair, make sure you book your ferry before you actually go on the Overland Track. there was people that hadn't done that, and they were kind of taking a bit of a punt about getting a spot on the ferry from Narcissus Bay across the lake. I think I saw one guy actually got sort of lucky and managed to get a free spot, but there's 3 services a day. There's a 9:45, a 1 p.m, and I think it's a 3:45 p.m. The 1 p.m. ferry is always the most popular, so if that's the time you're wanting to get on the ferry, I'd advise booking that well before your trip. So I had our spots booked. Unfortunately, I had to forfeit the other one because my friend, we weren't able to sort of let them know in advance that she wasn't going to be on the ferry because she didn't finish. But I'd just suggest getting that done well in advance, so you've sort of guaranteeing your spot. And then the last one, number 10, I've just said try and learn from others who are hiking the track. One of the things that I really enjoyed, and everyone wants different experiences, so sometimes I guess there's some of you who will just prefer to kind of, keep to yourself perhaps a bit more. I like the social element of this track as well, of this trek, and because I ended up being hiking on my own, I had a chance to sort of meet quite a few other hikers, and there was some of them had done the track before, some of them had done it multiple times, and there was just really good advice that you could take from other people, in their experiences of the overland tracks in particular, but also just I guess most of the people down there obviously have a common interest in doing hikes, and you can learn other things about tips that they've got from previous hikes that they've done, and you tend to meet some really interesting people. So I'd say if you're open to it, certainly take the chance to have a chat to some of your other hikers as you get a chance. So they were probably the top 10 things that I'd say were a real learning on the track. It was a different summer experience to what I had anticipated, as I said. Very wet and cold, but as I said before, it all came down to having the right gear to make that trip an enjoyable one for me, and I still absolutely loved the trip, so I'm really glad that I did it. So I thought I'd just quickly also talk about probably just 3 of the pieces of equipment, maybe 4, that really helped to make that experience enjoyable for me. So I'll just go quickly through those now. So look, probably at the top of the list, I'm going to have to say this thing, the wet weather jacket. This just made all the difference to not feeling cold. I was protected from the wind. This is it's not a really high-end jacket. This one, it's a Kathmandu Gore-Tex jacket. Probably a little bit heavy compared to some other ones, but this just made a huge difference for me with just keeping the wind off, staying reasonably dry. It gets to a point where there's been that much rain that this thing will get wet inside as well, but you still don't have the wind kind of cutting through you. I was protected from that, and at no point on the trip did I feel cold despite the weather being pretty cold. So this was, I'd say, invest in a good jacket, particularly if you know the weather's going to be bad, or even if you don't know it's going to be bad and it can change. This is a critical bit of equipment that can make a huge difference to your trip. So that's number 1. Number 2, I'm going to have to go back to my hiking poles. These things, as I said when I did the previous video on what I was taking, I use these all the time now on trips. They make a massive difference to the way my body feels in hiking up and down hills particularly. It just really makes a difference to the impact that you're getting on your quad muscles, your knees, and just helping with stability. That was a really important thing on the Overland Track. where, as I said, you had really uneven terrain a lot of the time with tree roots and rocks. This is like kind of like having an extra pair of legs essentially sometimes, because you're just getting that really good stability. And even on the areas where there was snow, actually, there was some really slippery parts where the snow melt was occurring, and you're kind of walking on a really sort of sludgy surface, which was really slippery, and these things actually saved me a couple of times from taking a fall. So I know there was probably about 50% of people I saw with hiking poles on the track. I kind of sung their praises to those who weren't using them, because I just think for me it's made just such a big difference to just the actual experience of walking each day. And yeah, I would say that is a great bit of equipment to buy if you haven't got some already, just to give them a try out. So that's number 2. Number 3 has got to be, look, the pack that I got. So this is the pack that I bought a few months ago. I had taken it on another multi-day hike previously where I was really happy with it. It pretty much stood up to really the wet weather that we had, and look, I'd taken extra precautions with a pack liner, which was just a garbage bag, and I had the rain cover on it pretty much the whole week while I was out in the rain and the snow. But yeah, there was very little moisture that actually got inside the pack, just probably a little bit up through the bottom. But this thing was great. It's just it was just really good design in terms of having some smaller pockets which you could get access to things easily, and for the amount of gear that I was taking, it was just about the right size. At the start of the week, it was pretty full, and then obviously as we got through food, it started to pack down quite nicely. So, and not to mention, the pack itself to carry was just so comfortable. When I was looking to get a new backpack, I spent a fair bit of time in the store I got it from with the guys, just loading me up with weight for different packs, and this one was it just felt right. So I'd say if you are looking at a new backpack for hiking, just make sure you try out a few different ones and have one that feels really comfortable for you once it's loaded up with weight. This one just felt really good to me compared to some of the other ones that I'd tried on, and this was a great pack to have on that track. So that's number 3. Probably the only other thing I'll just say is, again, it comes back to clothing. Most of the time I was only hiking in 2 layers. I just had my rain jacket, and then this was what I had underneath, which is just a merino wool base layer. And this thing, look, after the first day, I almost felt guilty a bit, because I got to the hut and I was actually completely dry underneath. I didn't have all the waterproofing that I had, so my rain jacket and waterproof pants, and then the boots that I had with the gaiters. My feet were completely dry as well, even after all that rain. Look, by the second and third day, my feet did get wet, but I always, even after a little bit of water came through my waterproof jacket and got a bit wet, I never felt cold, because this thing just it doesn't actually sort of allow you to get cold. You still stay warm, but these 2 layers together was a perfect combination for most days. The only other day I put an extra layer on was on the day we had snow, when the temperature really dropped, and I just had a fleece vest that I put on as an extra layer, and that was actually perfect number of layers for hiking in those temperatures. So yeah, clothing can make a huge difference. Look, these aren't cheap, being a merino wool sort of top, but the fabric really makes a huge difference, and it dried out reasonably quickly as well, so really good thing to take. So yeah, that's pretty much what I wanted to cover in this video. Look, overall, I would definitely recommend this trip for people who have been thinking about it. It's just, as I said, you can have a very different experience to the one I had, depending on what the weather is. That can obviously change everything quite a bit. But it goes back to that message of just, being prepared for everything in terms of the weather, and yeah, being flexible about your plans as well, which we ended up having to be just with what happened to my friend on the first day. So yeah, look, it's an amazing track. I had been wanting to do it, as I said, for a very long time, and despite it being a very wet week down there, I just really enjoyed it. It was the landscape just changes so frequently, and you've just got such a different variety of sort of landscapes that you're walking through from day to day. So it's really diverse. Yeah, unlike anything you'll probably see anywhere else, I think, unless potentially maybe New Zealand might be similar. But yeah, you're getting access to an area that a lot of people just will never see, because you can't get in there with vehicles. You have to be on foot, and it's just it's an amazing bit of Australia to go and explore if you really want to see that. So anyway, this is pretty much the end of the series. I just wanted to wrap it up with this. So hopefully this gives you guys a bit of advice if you're looking to do this trip yourself, either soon or in further in the future. And yeah, look, it's hopefully this whole series has kind of helped with planning the actual experience on the track, and yeah, just what the sort of view is after you've finished it. So I hope you guys enjoyed it all. I know I certainly have enjoyed making this series, and obviously having done the trip as well, it was just a great experience, and I hope to do some other ones of other tracks that I'm going to walk in the future. Take care, everyone.